When I try to describe what happened, sometimes I almost laugh. Not because anything about it was funny, but because the whole thing still feels unreal, like I wandered into someone else's nightmare by mistake. I had been living in Atlanta, Georgia, for 5 years at that point, sharing a classic 2-story brownstone on a leafy street off Ponce de Leon Avenue with my long-term partner, Nathan. Our place was the kind of home I used to dream about in college. High ceilings, battered wood floors, windows so big the sunlight poured through in long golden stripes. I filled it with books and framed photos and plants I half managed to keep alive, believing for a while that these things were proof I'd finally found stability. Nathan and I met in Boston during my senior year at Emerson College. I was an art student, broke and hungry, spending my evenings bartending at a little place in the North End. Nathan was a computer science major at MIT, the kind of person who could quote Shakespeare and write Python in the same breath. He was bright and intense, making me feel like I was the only person in any room. We fell in love hard and fast, the way only people in their early 20s can. Within a year, we moved in together, both of us desperate to get out of New England. Winters and Atlanta felt like a promise. Jobs in tech for him, more affordable rents, and an art scene for me. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like ours. By the time everything changed, we'd been together 7 years. I was working as a freelance graphic designer, mostly for small businesses, sometimes on bigger contracts for advertising agencies in New York or Chicago. My days were spent sketching ideas on the porch or tweaking layouts in my studio, drinking too much coffee and promising myself that tomorrow I'd go for a run. Nathan worked for a startup near Midtown, coding late into the night, complaining about incompetent bosses and idiots who think agile is a magic word. Our lives orbited around each other, shared Spotify playlists, Sunday morning bagels, long drives to the North Georgia mountains. The ordinary happiness of adulthood, or so I thought. That Friday night in March was cool and rainy, with the dogwoods just beginning to bloom. I'd gone to an art opening at a friend's new gallery in Inman Park, an old brick warehouse converted into a jungle of canvases and string lights. Nathan said he couldn't come because of a project deadline. I believed him. He kissed my cheek distractedly before I left, already half absorbed in his laptop. The show was loud and full of people I barely knew. I drank a glass of cheap Chardonnay, made small talk about color palettes and Instagram trends, then left early, feeling tired and oddly restless. I remember driving through Midtown, windshield wipers squeaking, thinking about what I might cook for dinner. Something simple, maybe pasta, since Nathan was picky and never liked anything too spicy. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily, my best friend since we were 14, telling me to call her when I got home. She'd moved back to Atlanta from Denver a year ago and had made it her mission to get me out of the apartment at least once a week. I smiled, promising myself I'd call her the next morning. I was less than a mile from home, waiting for the light at Piedmont and North Avenue, when everything went wrong. The last thing I saw was a blur of headlights coming from the right, far too fast. There was a sound, metal screaming, glass shattering, a sudden shock of cold air, and then the world just folded in on itself. I don't remember much after that. Someone shouting, the smell of gasoline, the taste of blood in my mouth. I must have passed out before the paramedics even arrived. The next memory I have is of waking up in a hospital room, sunlight slanting, through pale blue curtains, every inch of my body hurting. For a moment, I thought it was a bad dream. Then I tried to move and felt the hot, stabbing pain shoot through both legs, up my side, across my chest. Tubes ran out of my arms. My mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. I tried to sit up, but a nurse rushed in, gently pressing me back down. "Don't move too fast," she said. "You've been through a lot." I looked around, heart pounding, trying to understand. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. My left arm was strapped to my side, my right leg propped up in a cast. Someone had left a small bouquet of lilies on the bedside table with a card I couldn't quite reach. "Where's Nathan?" I croaked, though I was barely aware of what I was saying. The nurse's face softened. "Your friend Emily's been here all night. She'll be back soon." She handed me a cup of water and I sipped gratefully, trying to piece together what had happened. A few hours, or maybe it was just minutes. Later, Emily came in, carrying a bag of clothes and a tired, anxious smile. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying and lack of sleep, but she pulled herself together the second she saw me awake. She sat down, squeezed my hand, and started talking, filling in all the blanks. 2 broken legs, a fractured collarbone, and a concussion. Surgery on both femurs. Dozens of stitches across my scalp and chin. I'd been unconscious for 2 days, scaring everyone half to death. My parents were flying in from Chicago, and the doctors were optimistic but cautious. "You're lucky to be alive," Emily kept saying, over and over as if saying it would make it feel true. I kept waiting for Nathan to walk through the door. I wanted his voice, his touch, even his usual rambling complaints about hospital coffee. Instead, Emily took care of everything. She signed forms, talked to the doctors, updated my parents, and even brought my favorite lip balm from home. She sat with me through the endless parade of nurses and specialists, fielding calls and making gentle jokes to keep my spirits up. The first night, when the pain was worst and I started to cry, she held me without saying a word. I don't think I'll ever forget the way she looked at me, determined and unafraid, as if she could will me back to health through sheer stubbornness. Nathan finally arrived on the afternoon of the 3rd day. I remember hearing his voice in the hallway, louder than necessary, telling a nurse he was the boyfriend, and feeling a strange flutter in my chest. Relief, maybe, mixed with dread. When he walked in, his hair was mussed, and he wore the same rumpled t-shirt I'd seen him leave in days before. He barely looked at me, instead fiddling with his phone. I tried to smile, even though it hurt. "Hey," I whispered. He glanced up, offering a tight, uncomfortable smile. "Hey, so you're awake?" He didn't come closer. Instead, he perched on the arm of the visitor chair, scrolling through his texts. I waited for him to ask if I was okay, to take my hand, to cry or get angry or say anything real. But he didn't. Instead, he launched into a monologue about how his boss was being unreasonable about his missed work, how expensive parking was at the hospital, and how he hoped I'd be out soon because this kind of thing throws off our schedule. I felt like an item on his to-do list, an inconvenience to be checked off. He stayed for 15 minutes. He glanced at my cast once, then asked if I remembered our Netflix password. Before he left, he promised to stop by again, if he could. Get away. But I knew even then that he wouldn't. When the door closed behind him, Emily rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. She didn't say anything, but the message was clear. Nathan was not the partner I thought he was. The next few days blurred together in a haze of painkillers, physical therapy, and awkward phone calls with relatives. My parents arrived from Chicago, bringing with them an air of worry and exhaustion. My mother fluttered around the room, straightening things and asking the nurses endless questions. My father hovered near the window, quietly watching me with a mixture of fear and helplessness I'd never seen before. Through it all, Emily remained my anchor. She organized my visitors, coordinated with the doctors, and even managed to sneak me a real coffee from the cafe down the street when hospital sludge became unbearable. Nathan sent a few texts, usually asking for updates or reminding me to pay the credit card bill. He never asked if I was scared or lonely, never offered to bring me anything from home. When he did stop by, it was always late at night, after visiting hours, and he never stayed, long enough to see the nurses change my dressings or help me to the bathroom. The contrast between him and Emily was impossible to ignore. Where she was attentive, he was distracted. Where she offered comfort, he offered inconvenience. It was during one of the endless, sleepless nights in the hospital that I began scrolling through my phone, desperate for distraction. My fingers, clumsy with bandages, opened Instagram out of habit. The first thing I saw was a picture from a mutual friend, Rebecca, from Nathan's work. It was a group shot, clearly at someone's apartment with Nathan front and center. His arm was around a woman I recognized instantly, Tiffany, his college girlfriend. They looked happy, giddy even, grinning at the camera with matching red Solo cups. The caption read, "Nathan is finally free, back where he belongs." The comments were even worse. Friends joked about him, escaping the drama and finally having fun again. One person even tagged Tiffany, writing, "You two always belong together." I kept scrolling, hoping it was a one-off, a misunderstanding. But there were more photos. Nathan and Tiffany, laughing at a crowded bar. Nathan, shirtless, is playing beer pong. In one video, someone asked how I was doing. Nathan, half drunk, shouted, "She'll survive. She's always been a needy drama queen." Laughter, off camera, and then the video ended. I stared at my phone, numb. The pain in my body faded into something colder, sharper. Every bruise and fracture throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I tried to rationalize. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe the accident had been too much for him to handle. But the truth was obvious, brutal in its simplicity. Nathan wasn't grieving. He wasn't waiting for me. He was celebrating his freedom. I didn't cry. I just lay back on the stiff hospital pillows, phone pressed to my chest, and realized, with a clarity that hurt more than any broken bone, that I was completely alone. The life I thought I'd built, the love, the home, the future I'd imagined, had evaporated in the space of a few Instagram posts. Nathan had moved on without a backward glance. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I went through the motions, physiotherapy, counseling sessions, awkward small talk with visiting relatives, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. I started making lists in my head, things I could control, things I needed to do, people I could still trust. Emily became my confidant, my advocate, my lifeline. My parents did their best, hovering between concern and frustration, but it was Emily who never left my side, who never let me forget that I was still here, myself, no matter what Nathan did or said. Even then, I knew there would be no going back to the way things were. My recovery would not just be about bones and muscles, but about untangling my life from a man who had proven himself a stranger. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this much. I would not let Nathan or his absence define me. I had survived the crash. Now I had to survive the aftermath. Looking back, it was the moment everything changed. The end of one chapter, and the uncertain beginning of another. I was on my own, but for the first time, I saw that maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where I needed to be. If I had thought the hospital was hard, I was completely unprepared for what recovery would mean at home. The thing about physical pain is that, with time, medication, and the right kind of care, you can track its progress. It has a beginning, a middle, and if you're lucky, an end. But coming back to my apartment in Atlanta after 5 weeks away, I realized that some wounds aren't measured in swelling or x-rays. Some hurts are invisible and gather in the corners, clinging to objects and memories, making even the sunniest room feel heavy. My return was orchestrated by Emily and my mom, who fussed over every detail. Emily brought a batch of blueberry muffins. She'd made herself determined that my first breakfast at home wouldn't be hospital oatmeal. My mother had scrubbed the kitchen and set out new sheets in the bedroom, as if fresh linen could erase everything that had happened. I'd pictured this day for weeks, imagining I would collapse into my bed, grateful to be somewhere familiar. But the reality was jarring. Nothing felt familiar. Not really. The apartment was still the same. The creak in the hallway floorboards, the way the morning light filtered through the old warped windows, the faint smell of eucalyptus from the candle I always forgot to blow out. But something was off, and I could feel it from the moment Emily wheeled me in. The air seemed thinner. My home had become a museum of my old life, haunted by echoes of laughter that didn't belong to me anymore. Every room was a snapshot of the years Nathan and I had shared. The living room was dominated by bookshelves we'd assembled one rainy Saturday, fighting over the instructions and then making up over takeout Chinese. Each shelf sagged under the weight of our joint history, my battered copy of Jane Eyre, next to his endless stack of science fiction hardcovers, ticket stubs from Broadway shows, and the ugly ceramic mug I made for him during a pottery phase. The artwork on the walls was a catalog of our travels, a black and white print from the Met in New York, a watercolor from a street artist in Chicago. In the far corner, stacked almost to the ceiling, were Nathan's prized possessions, boxes of vinyl records, action figures in unopened packaging, and several plastic tubs crammed with PlayStation controllers and tangled cords. There was a time I would have called it all ours. Now I saw it for what it was, a jumble of things, some precious, some petty, all jumbled together by the inertia of a relationship that should have ended years before. My first night home, Emily insisted on staying over, sleeping on the couch, in case I needed anything. My mom left after making a casserole, promising to return with groceries. Lying in my bed, the sheets cool and crisp, I listened to the sounds of the city, sirens in the distance, the soft hum of my neighbor's TV, and tried to piece together what had happened to me. My body hurt in new ways, aching from the effort of simply getting from the bathroom to the bedroom, but the real pain was deeper. It was the ache of disappointment, of betrayal, of realizing that the person you loved most had already left you long before you left him. I didn't see Nathan. For days after I got home, he sent a few texts, mostly about practical things. Did I know where his black hoodie was? Could I mail him his passport? One message, written late at night, asked if I'd consider helping out with some money for his crypto investments. I laughed when I read it, a sharp, bitter sound that made Emily look up from her magazine. "You're kidding," she said, grabbing my phone. She read the message, rolled her eyes, and deleted it before I could answer. Emily, for all her kindness, never liked Nathan. She tolerated him because I asked her to, biting her tongue during holidays and game nights. Now that the truth was out, she wasted no energy pretending. She handled my laundry, ran errands, kept my medication schedule, and most importantly, helped me avoid Nathan in every possible way. My parents were a different story. My mom, always a fixer, believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. My dad, quieter but sharper, saw through Nathan almost from the start. "You know, honey, it's easy to love someone when life is good," he said, helping me sort through a stack of unopened mail. "The real test is how they act when everything falls apart." I nodded, even as shame curled in my stomach. How? Could I not have seen it sooner? The first week home was a blur of medical appointments, physical therapy, and bureaucratic paperwork. Every day brought a new realization of how much Nathan had left undone. There were bills I'd never seen, utilities, past due, and a stack of credit card statements that made my heart sink. I'd always trusted Nathan to handle the big stuff because he said he was better at it. "You're the creative one, babe. Let me deal with the boring financial junk," he used to say, his arm draped lazily over my shoulder. Now I saw what that trust had cost me. Sitting at the dining table with Emily and my mom, I began the slow, humiliating process of sorting through our finances. The truth revealed itself in columns of numbers and official-sounding letters. I had nearly $12,000 in debt, spread across 3 credit cards, all in my name. The rent was overdue by 2 months. The electric bill, cable, and water were all behind. Worst of all, Nathan had been dipping into the emergency savings account I'd built before we even met, withdrawing hundreds at a time for investment opportunities, or, as I later discovered, nights out with friends. The more we dug, the worse it got. There were old emails from Nathan to his mother in Denver, bragging about how generous he was for supporting me while I figured out my career. In reality, I'd been paying for everything: groceries, utilities, even his car insurance, while he treated his paychecks like pocket money, splurging on collectibles and the latest gadgets. I found receipts for dinners I never attended, concert, tickets for shows I wasn't invited to, and endless purchases from online retailers for things he never even opened. The boxes in our living room, once symbols of Nathan's quirky hobbies, now felt like evidence in a crime. I cried the night we finished adding up the totals, not because of the money, though the sheer amount made my chest tight, but because of the lies. Every dollar was a secret Nathan kept, a piece of trust he chipped away. My mom held me as I sobbed, whispering that it would all be okay, that we'd figure it out. Emily didn't say anything, just rubbed my back in slow circles, until I was all cried out. The next morning, fueled by a new kind of resolve, I decided to take control. I started by calling the landlord, Mrs. Henderson. She was a kind woman in her 70s who had owned our building since the early 80s. She knew me by name, always stopped to chat when we met in the lobby, and brought cookies to tenants. During the holidays, When I explained everything, my injuries, Nathan's betrayal, the overdue rent, she listened patiently. "Don't you worry, sweetheart," she said. "We'll get this sorted. You're not the first woman to deal with a man who thinks he can just walk away. Let's make a plan." Together with Mrs. Henderson's understanding, Emily's support, and my family's encouragement, I began the process of untangling myself from Nathan, piece by painful piece. We made a list of everything in the apartment that belonged to him, his. Action figures, his vinyl records, his clothes, every piece of tech he'd insisted was essential for his work and play. The list was longer than I expected, a testament to how much space he took up, both physically and emotionally. Packing. Up Nathan's things was harder than I thought it would be. Each object told a story, some sweet, some sour. The faded hoodie he always wore on lazy Sundays. The battered PlayStation controller he claimed was lucky. The stack of unopened mail addressed to him, collecting dust under the TV. I boxed it all with Emily and my mom, taping each container shut with an odd sense of finality. We labeled them with his name in big black letters and stacked them by the door. When we got to his prized collectibles, the Star Wars figurines, the vinyl records still in their shrink wrap, I felt a flash of anger. These were the things he'd refused to let me touch, the things he'd spent hundreds of dollars on while I worried about paying for groceries. I didn't care anymore. Into the black trash bags they went, each one landing with a satisfying thud. My dad came by that afternoon, rolling up his sleeves to help carry the boxes to the curb. Mrs. Henderson supervised from the porch, arms crossed, her lips pursed in approval. We arranged everything in a neat row next to the dumpster, placing the trash bags right on top. It felt symbolic. If Nathan wanted his treasures, he'd have to dig for them. Changing the locks was the last step. I held the new key in my palm, smooth and heavy, and felt something loosen in my chest. Emily texted Nathan a photo of the key and a simple message: "You're out. The rest is in the dumpster out back. Do not come in." My family and the landlord know everything. I half expected him to show up, to plead or rage or at least try to argue, but he didn't. Maybe he was too proud. Maybe Tiffany or one of his other friends had offered him a place to crash. Maybe for the first time he realized he was truly alone. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that's both relief and loneliness. I sat on the couch with Emily, watching bad reality TV and eating microwave popcorn, and tried to imagine what life would look like without Nathan. My apartment felt bigger, emptier, and yet, in some strange way, more mine than it had ever been. Cleaning house, I discovered, wasn't just about clearing out Nathan's things. It was about reclaiming the space, making it my own again. I rearranged the furniture, threw out the wilted plants, and hung new photos on the walls. I donated some of the things we'd bought together to Goodwill, keeping only what sparked real joy. My mom helped me start a budget, and Emily made a spreadsheet for my bills. We tackled the mountain of debt, one phone call at a time, setting up payment plans and canceling every joint account. It was slow work, and sometimes, at night, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text Nathan about something funny or frustrating, only to remember there was no us anymore. But each day, the ache got a little lighter, the apartment a little brighter. My family, my friends, and Mrs. Henderson rallied around me, filling the gaps Nathan left behind. By the end of that month, I felt different, stronger, clearer, even a little hopeful. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to rescue me. I was saving myself, one step, one room, one breath at a time. I never thought ending things with Nathan would be easy. But I didn't expect the full hurricane that arrived in the weeks after I packed up his life and set it on the curb. There's something almost comic about how people show their true colors once the music stops and the lights come up. I had hoped naively that Nathan would simply fade away, licking his wounds and maybe, if I was lucky, learning a single lesson about accountability. Instead, what followed was a reckoning, not just for him, but for me, his mother, and everyone who had ever bought into the image he worked so hard to project. Nathan's response to being evicted from my apartment was, at first, eerily silent. For 3 days, nothing. No texts, no calls, no angry voicemails or late-night visits. I began to think maybe he'd found somewhere to land. Perhaps Tiffany's couch, or one of the many friends who loved to bask in his charming, slightly reckless glow. Emily was skeptical. He's not the type to go quietly, she warned, but I tried to convince myself that I'd finally closed the book on that chapter. For the first time in months, I slept a little easier. On the fourth day, the phone calls began. Not from Nathan, but from his mother, Janet. Janet was a force of nature, a woman who managed a nonprofit in Denver and prided herself on being both a cool mom and the iron fist holding her family together. When Nathan and I first met, she'd welcomed me with open arms, lavishing me with gifts every holiday, sending handwritten letters and family recipes. Over time, I learned that her warmth was often conditional, a reward for playing by her rules and, more importantly, for supporting her son's carefully crafted narrative of perpetual victimhood. The first call came early in the morning, waking me from a rare, dreamless sleep. I recognized the Colorado area code before I even picked up. My stomach twisted. Emily, camped out on my couch with a bowl of cereal, gave me a look that said, "Don't do it." But I answered anyway. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, even, to me. There was a beat of silence, then Janet's familiar voice, choked and shrill. "How could you do this to Nathan? He called me in tears. He's devastated. He said you threw him out like garbage after everything he's done for you." I listened, trying to keep my breathing steady as she launched into a list of accusations. That I was cold-hearted, ungrateful, vindictive. That I had stolen years from Nathan, drained his spirit, and ruined his future. I could hear the trembling in her voice, the panic beneath the anger. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, caught up in the hurricane her son had spun. But pity has its limits. When she paused for breath, I answered as calmly as I could. "I understand you're upset," I said. "But you don't know the whole story," she scoffed. "He's always supported you. He put you through school, paid your bills. He said you wouldn't even have that apartment without him." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could help it. "Janet, I paid for everything. The rent, the groceries, his car insurance, I can show you every receipt, every transaction. I'm the one left with the debt." There was another pause, longer this time. "That's not what Nathan told me." I swallowed, trying not to let the years of frustration show in my voice. "I have all the records. If you want the truth, I'll send it to you. I never wanted to hurt you, but you deserve to know what's happened." She didn't answer. The line went dead. I spent the rest of the morning digging up paperwork. Emily brewed coffee and sat beside me, sorting stacks of bank statements, credit card bills, and Venmo receipts. We printed out everything. Every charge, every overdraft, fee, every withdrawal from my savings account that Nathan had made for us. Emily even made a spreadsheet, color-coded, showing the total of my support. Every rent payment, every trip to the grocery store, every forgotten birthday gift that I'd purchased on our behalf, because Nathan's wallet was always conveniently empty. It took hours, and by the end of it, I felt wrung out and exhausted. But there was a grim satisfaction in seeing it all in black and white. No more confusion, no more half-remembered arguments. Just the truth, laid bare. I attached everything to an email for Janet. Every scanned receipt, every statement, every cell in Emily's meticulous spreadsheet. I wrote a short note. "I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you. I never wanted to hurt you, but these are the facts. Please check the records before you defend your son. I wish you well." I hit send and tried not to imagine what she would think when she opened it. Nathan, meanwhile, was beginning to lose control of his own story. He tried calling a few times, leaving me voicemails that swung wildly between pleading and rage. "You ruined my life," he hissed in one. "I loved you. I gave you everything. How could you do this?" The next message, sent just minutes later, was softer. "I'm sorry, babe. I messed up. Please, just let me come home. I'll fix everything." I deleted them all without listening to the end. A few days later, Emily and I returned from a physical therapy appointment to find something strange on my doorstep. A battered, old 5-gallon bucket, heavy with soil and the unmistakable smell of compost. I stared at it, confused, until Emily spotted something glinting among the coffee grounds and banana peels. She reached in with a stick and fished out my old engagement ring, tarnished, sticky, and hopelessly bent out of shape. We both stared at it in disbelief. "You have to be kidding me," Emily said, holding the ring gingerly between two fingers. "This is like something out of a bad sitcom." I took the ring, wiped it off on my jeans, and set it on the windowsill. It looked dull and ugly in the sunlight. There was no note, just the absurd gesture, a desperate, childish attempt to provoke a reaction. The next morning, I received a message from one of Nathan's friends in Boston, a guy named Mike who had always struck me as decent, if a little gullible. He forwarded me a link to a GoFundMe page. "Hey, is this legit?" he wrote. The page was titled "Help Me Help Her Support Anna's Recovery," complete with a photo of me in my hospital bed, a photo I had never authorized anyone to use. Nathan had written a dramatic story about my devastating accident and his efforts to keep us afloat during her darkest days. He claimed I was unable to work, that we were on the verge of eviction, and that any donations would go directly to Anna's medical care and rehabilitation. My jaw dropped. I read the page 3 times, rage boiling in my chest. None of it was true. Not the claims about my inability to work, not the tearful pleas for help, and certainly not the part about the money going to me. I scrolled through the list of donors. Some people I knew, many I didn't. All told, Nathan had raised almost $900 in 3 days. I reported the page immediately, attaching proof of the scam and a statement that I had not authorized any fundraiser in my name. Emily and I posted a message to all our friends in social media. If you've seen a GoFundMe using my photo or story, please know I did not create it, and I do not benefit from any donations. Thank you for your concern, but please do not contribute. Within hours, the page was taken down, and Nathan's friends started texting me apologies, embarrassed and angry that they'd been fooled. Nathan's next move was to show up at the apartment. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Emily and I were watching a cooking show, savoring the rare peace, when I heard loud banging at the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Nathan, disheveled, red-eyed, hair wild. He was shouting my name, demanding to be let in. My heart pounded, but I stood my ground. "You need to leave, Nathan. You don't live here anymore." He pounded harder, yelling insults, calling me a traitor, a thief, a liar. Emily called Mrs. Henderson, who lived just 1 floor below, and within minutes, she was in the hallway, arms crossed, phone in hand. "That's enough, Nathan," she said, her voice steely. "You need to leave or I'm calling the police." He raged and ranted, kicking at the boxes he'd left behind, tossing one of his old vinyl records down the stairs. I could see in his face that he didn't expect anyone to stand up to him, especially not Mrs. Henderson, who had always been polite, grandmotherly. But she stared him down until the building's maintenance man arrived, and together they ushered him out of the building. He wasn't gone for long. An hour later, the police showed up at my door. One officer, a woman with kind eyes, asked if I was safe. I explained what had happened. She nodded, taking notes, and said, "You're not the first woman he's harassed. If he comes back, call us right away." Later that night, I learned that Nathan had been arrested on an outstanding warrant, something unrelated, from months earlier. He'd spent the night in jail. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all his bluster, all his attempts to manipulate and control, it wasn't my anger or my revenge that brought him down. It was his carelessness, his unwillingness to take responsibility for anything, ever. 3 days after I sent Janet the documentation, she called me again. This time her voice was quiet, almost broken. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know. He lied to me too. For years I defended him, covered for him, sent him money when he asked for it. I thought I was helping. I see now I was only enabling him." I listened, surprised by the rawness of her confession. Janet had always seemed so sure of herself, so certain that her son could do no wrong. Now she sounded older, tired. She told me she'd sent me a check for $2,000. A small gesture, she called it, but I wanted to help somehow. She promised to speak to Nathan, to set things right on her end. I thanked her, unsure of what else to say. I could hear the pain in her voice, the guilt and regret. For a moment, I almost wished I could comfort her. But I knew that wasn't my job anymore. In the aftermath of all this chaos, I found a strange kind of peace. The storm had passed, leaving debris in its wake, but also a sense of clarity. I no longer wondered what I could have done differently. I no longer doubted my memories, my worth. Nathan had tried everything: guilt, rage, manipulation, even fraud, and in the end, none of it worked. What I learned in those weeks of reckoning is that truth is a powerful thing. It's not always loud, not always dramatic, but it endures. It sits quietly in the background, waiting for the lies to unravel, for the masks to slip. And when it finally emerges, it can be both devastating and liberating. I started to rebuild my life, day by day. I paid off debts, reached out to friends I'd neglected, and allowed myself finally to believe that I deserved better. I grieved, but I also grew. The reckoning wasn't just about Nathan facing consequences. It was about me reclaiming my story, my strength, and my future. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Healing, I discovered, isn't a finish line you stumble. A cross, exhausted and triumphant. It's a landscape you cross slowly, sometimes on hands and knees, unsure if you're moving forward at all. In the days and weeks after the reckoning with Nathan and his mother, I realized my real work was just beginning. The car accident may have broken my bones, but losing Nathan, and finally seeing the truth, was what broke open my sense of self. I didn't just have to recover from the trauma. I had to build a new life in the space he left behind. The physical wounds were, in some ways, the easiest to track. My body was a map of bruises, scars, and sore muscles. I spent mornings in physical therapy, learning how to move again, coaxing strength back into my legs, one slow stretch at a time. My therapist, a sharp-tongued woman named Jackie, believed in tough love. She wouldn't let me wallow or give up. Every time I tried to apologize for my slow progress, she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "You get to heal at your own pace," she'd say, watching me struggle to balance on the parallel bars. "You lived. That's already a win. Now, let's see how far you can go." The bruises faded and the pain dulled to a memory, but the emotional injuries lingered. It's astonishing how a person can become so entangled in your sense of worth that, when they're gone, you don't know who you are. For weeks, I found myself reaching for my phone, tempted to text Nathan whenever something odd or funny happened. Habits like that die slow, stubborn deaths. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rhonda, who wore oversized cardigans and had the patience of a saint. The first time I sat across from her, I tried to make light of my situation, joking about my excess baggage and how at least my life wasn't boring. She didn't laugh. Instead, she asked me to sit in silence for a minute, to just breathe and notice how it felt to be me, in my own body, without anyone else's noise. It was harder than I thought. The biggest hurdle was forgiving myself. It's strange, but even after everything Nathan had done, the lies and manipulation, the debt and betrayal, I felt like I had failed. Like my inability to fix him or hold the relationship together was proof of some deeper flaw. Dr. Rhonda called this magical thinking, the belief that if I'd only loved harder or been less needy, I could have made everything okay. Together, we picked that thinking apart. I learned to see the difference between loving someone and enabling their worst behaviors. It wasn't my job to be Nathan's savior, or anyone's for that matter. My circle grew tighter but stronger. Emily, true to her promise, remained my steadfast companion. She brought me dinner on nights I didn't feel like cooking, sat with me at physical therapy, and gently nudged me into the world when I felt like hiding. My parents, once so far away in Chicago, became a bigger part of my daily life. My mom texts me inspirational quotes every morning. My dad sent me links to articles about budgeting and healthy eating. Sometimes their efforts made me roll my eyes, but I loved them all the more for it. As the seasons changed, so did my life. I took stock of everything Nathan had left behind and decided to sell what I could. His unopened vinyl records and collectibles brought in more money than I expected, almost $4,000 in total. Emily joked that I should treat myself to a vacation, but I used the money to pay off as much debt as possible. Watching the numbers shrink gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. Once the apartment was finally my own, stripped of Nathan's clutter and the old ghosts, I began to see it differently. Sunlight filled the living room, painting golden squares on the floorboards in the late afternoon. I rearranged the furniture, donated the things I didn't need, and painted an accent wall a cheerful, hopeful shade of blue. For the first time, the space felt like a reflection of me. Not a compromise, not a shared territory, but my tiny kingdom. Even so, I realized I needed a fresh start. Atlanta was still home, but the apartment had become too loaded with memories, good and bad. I wanted to step into a new chapter, literally and figuratively. So I started hunting for a place closer to the Beltline, where I could walk and be part of the city's heartbeat again. It wasn't easy. The rental market was brutal, and I didn't have much in savings after paying off the last of Nathan's debts. But one morning, as I scrolled through listings, I found it. A small, sun-drenched apartment above a bakery on Irwin Street. The rent was just within reach, and when I toured it, I was greeted by the smell of fresh bread and the distant hum of cyclists whirring past on the Beltline. The windows looked out over the city, and for a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to wake up to that view every morning, to build something new and wholly my own, with help from Emily, my parents, and even Mrs. Henderson, who baked me a farewell pie. I packed up my things and made the move. The new apartment was tiny, with a bedroom just big enough for my bed and a desk, a galley kitchen, and a narrow balcony crowded with flower boxes. But it was perfect. I spent the first night sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by boxes, sipping cheap wine and feeling, for the first time in a long while, genuinely free. As I settled into my new routine, I started venturing out on the Beltline, cane in hand at first, then on my own. Each step was both an act of defiance and a celebration. I passed families on bikes, runners, and artists selling paintings from folding tables. Sometimes I stopped at the little farmer's market and let myself buy strawberries or sunflowers, even when I thought it was frivolous. The more I explored, the more the city opened up to me, full of possibility and hope. The hardest part, strangely, was letting myself trust again. I found myself wary, quick to flinch at the first sign of disappointment. Dr. Rhonda helped me work through those fears. "Boundaries are a gift, not a punishment," she told me once after I confessed I'd turned down a dinner invitation from an old friend, worried I would be a burden. "You get to decide who you let in and when." Little by little, I let, new people into my world. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my years with Nathan. I started attending a weekly art class, something I hadn't done since college, and was surprised by how quickly my creativity returned. The instructor, a lively woman named Megan, encouraged me to experiment with colors and forms, to make a mess, to let go of perfection. For a few hours each week, I lost myself in paint and possibility, and when I looked at my finished canvases, I saw a woman slowly rebuilding herself, one brushstroke at a time. One chilly afternoon in late fall, Janet reached out to me again. I hadn't heard from her since the aftermath of Nathan's meltdown and her apology over the phone. She asked if we could meet for coffee in Midtown. At first I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to revisit the past or risk reopening old wounds, but something in her message felt different. So I agreed, and we met at a quiet cafe, the kind with battered leather chairs and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Janet looked older than I remembered, her hair streaked with silver, her face drawn with worry. She handed me an envelope, a handwritten letter, along with a check for $1,500. Her hands shook as she pushed it across the table. "I wish I'd seen the truth sooner," she said softly, her voice thick with regret. "I can't fix what happened, but I want you to know I'm trying. Nathan is getting help. I'm getting help too." I read her letter later that night. It was honest and raw, full of sorrow and self-reproach, but also gratitude. She thanked me for loving her son, for trying so hard, for showing her a side of herself she hadn't wanted to see. "You deserved so much more," she wrote. "And I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you when it mattered most." We hugged before parting, an awkward, tentative embrace that felt like both an ending and a beginning. I walked away lighter, knowing that I no longer carried the weight of Janet's disappointment or Nathan's failures. Their story was no longer mine to carry. With that last chapter closed, I leaned fully into the future. My days took on a quiet rhythm, I woke up early, savoring coffee on my little balcony as the city came alive. I worked steadily, taking on new design projects, slowly rebuilding my savings. I treated myself to flowers, good bread, books, and the occasional night out with friends. I learned how to cook for one and enjoy it, stirring risotto or roasting vegetables while music played in the background. I built rituals that grounded me. Sunday morning walks to the park, movie nights with Emily, video calls with my parents. I even started volunteering at a community center, helping teens with art projects and college applications. Their energy and optimism reminded me of who I'd been before the world knocked me sideways, and I found purpose in giving back, in helping someone else write their own story. Most importantly, I learned to stop apologizing for who I was. I stopped calling myself too much or too needy. I stopped shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. I realized, finally, that needing care is not a weakness, and loving deeply is not a crime. The true danger lies in giving everything to someone who only takes until you're empty and don't recognize yourself in the mirror. Looking back, I don't regret the lessons I learned. I found my strength, my voice, and a future I could claim with pride. I learned to trust the people who show up, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard and messy and inconvenient. I learned to walk away from those who cannot or will not do the same. In America, in my little corner of Atlanta, that is the real freedom I never knew I needed. I am not the same woman who woke up in that hospital bed, broken and afraid. I am someone new. Scarred, yes, but also hopeful, curious, and alive. My story is still being written day by day, and for the first time in a long while, I am the one holding the pen.
I walked into the wedding hall alone, the soft click of my heels drowned out by the music and laughter echoing off the high ceilings. My navy blue dress felt heavier with every step, as if it carried the weight of every glance that flicked toward me and then away. It was beautiful, elegant even, but on me it felt like a flag announcing my aloneness. Clusters of guests swirled around champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, their conversations rising in a collective hum that made me feel like a single, discordant note. I adjusted the neckline of my dress and tried to focus on my breathing. Inhale, exhale, step forward. My legs kept moving even as my heart pounded out a beat that didn't match the music. I spotted Kimberly near the bar, already whispering into someone's ear. Her eyes met mine for a brief second, and I saw it, that glint of mean amusement she never really bothered to hide. She turned back to her friend, lips curling as she said something that made the other girls smirk. I didn't have to hear it to know what it was like. They always thought they were subtle, but they never were. I shifted my eyes away and made my way through the crowd, past tables of relatives I hadn't seen in years. Some offered nods of recognition. Others didn't even bother pretending they remembered me. My mother waved at me with a forced smile, her eyes scanning me like a doctor searching for symptoms. Pity clung to her face like perfume, sweet and stifling. She patted the empty seat beside her, but I shook my head. I didn't want to sit there and pretend.
Pretend I was okay.
Pretend I wasn't exactly what they expected me to be, alone, quiet, slightly too intense. Dad didn't even look up. He was too busy talking to Uncle Rick some story about investments in cabins and things I was never invited to. He nodded at something Rick said and sipped his drink, not even noticing me and not even glancing. It used to hurt more. Now, it just added another layer to the numbness I wore like armor. I finally found an empty spot near the back corner of the hall. It wasn't hidden, but it felt like safety. A small table with a half-empty water glass and a crumpled napkin. I sat there, keeping my back straight, pretending I was just waiting for someone. Anyone. Pretending I wasn't close to crying. The music was soft now, strings and piano, and the bride was glowing up front, holding on to a love I didn't believe in anymore. I studied her for a moment, her laughter bubbling as she adjusted her veil and leaned into her new husband. She looked radiant, genuinely so, like she had never had her heart broken or sat in a therapist's office trying to unlearn the way she loved. I tried to summon some happiness for her. I tried to feel something other than envy, but it pressed in on me, a low ache behind my ribs. For a second, I let my eyes close. Just to breathe. Just to let the ache inside me settle. I could already picture what Kimberly had whispered to her friend. Something sharp and saccharine. Something about how I always looked like I was holding my breath, waiting for a life that never showed up. Something about how I never brought a date to anything. I always hovered around the edges like I was allergic to belonging. Then, without warning, the double doors slammed open with a force that silenced everything for half a beat. All heads turned, and in walked someone no one expected. But before I get to that moment, I have to take you back. I grew up in Boston, in a house where silence often said more than words. From a young age, I was the responsible one. The one who remembered dentist appointments, helped fold the laundry, and brought home report cards filled with A's. I didn't scream for attention or throw tantrums. I simply did what was expected of me. And somehow that made me invisible. Kimberly, on the other hand, was the star. Loud, emotional, and dramatic in all the ways that drew everyone's eyes. When she cried, the whole house stopped. When she succeeded, the walls echoed with celebration. I used to think maybe if I just tried harder, did more, they'd look at me the way they looked at her. But no matter how many trophies I lined up on my shelf, Kimberly's smile in a new dress or her latest boyfriend made everyone forget them. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't like her. I didn't need the spotlight. I didn't crave applause. But deep down, I wanted to be seen. Not for my grades or my posture or my ability to keep a secret. Just seen. So I pushed myself through high school, college, grad school. All of it with blinders on. I told myself it was for me, that I wanted to build a life I could be proud of. And I did, in a way. I landed a great job, made enough money to support myself, rented a sunlit apartment on the 5th floor of a quiet building with hardwood floors and a little balcony I never used. I bought groceries for one and arranged my books alphabetically. Everything was in its place. But when I came home at night, it was just me and the hum of the refrigerator. There were no candlelit dinners or spontaneous getaways. There was no one to talk to about my day, no one waiting for me to come home. Sometimes I told myself that was fine. I needed the quiet. Other nights, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what I had done wrong. Kimberly, meanwhile, had gotten engaged for the second time by 28. Her Instagram looked like a highlight reel from a rom-com. People liked that. They liked photos of hand-holding and latte art and smiling couples on beaches. No one wants to see a woman sitting alone at her desk at 10 p.m., eating noodles straight from the pot. Then there was Alex. We were together for 3 years. He made me laugh, listened to my plans, and told me he admired how driven I was. I believed him. I trusted him. Until I found out he'd been sleeping with someone else, someone less intense, as he put it. That phrase carved itself into me like a knife. Less intense. As if the depth of my love, my ambition, my presence, had been too much for him. As if what I had offered had been more of a burden than a gift. After him, I stopped expecting anyone to stay. I built walls. I learned how to rely on no one but myself. I became good at solitude. Too good, maybe. So now, back in that hall, in that navy dress that felt more like a spotlight than a shield, I waited. I waited in the quiet corner of the room, pretending I didn't notice the stairs, pretending my heart wasn't tightening with every laugh I wasn't a part of. And then the doors flew open. There was a pause, a shared breath, a collective lean forward. And just like that, everything changed. The thing is, when you're the strong one, no one checks in on you.
They assume you're fine.
You become a safe place for others, even while you're crumbling inside. I became good at hiding the cracks, practiced at it, smiling while something inside me caved in just a little more, nodding along while people confided in me, reassured by how together I always seemed. So when the invitation came for Jessica's wedding, I didn't hesitate. I RSVP'd for one. I typed it without blinking. But that didn't stop my mother from calling the moment she saw the envelope. You sure you don't want to bring someone, sweetheart? A friend, maybe? I'm fine, Mom. There was a pause on the line, then a sigh so soft I almost missed it.
Okay. Just thought it might be nice. Nice.
Not kind. Not comforting. Not even thoughtful. No, what she meant was simple. It would look better. Less awkward. Less like failure. Less like me. I hung up and went back to my work, pretending it didn't sting. Pretending her sigh didn't echo in the quiet room, circling the way silence always did when you lived alone. I opened my laptop, forced my eyes onto spreadsheets and reports. Numbers were easy. Predictable. People were not. And now, sitting in that wedding hall, alone in my navy blue dress, I felt the weight of every comparison, every second I'd spent trying to prove I was enough. All those years of being the reliable one, the stable one, the one who held it all together. None of it mattered here. Here, all they saw was that I came without a date. That Kimberly had brought someone new again, dazzling in her red heels and perfect lipstick. That I was the one still alone. But I hadn't come to be seen. I came because I owed it to Jessica. Because I wasn't going to hide from moments just because they were hard. I was tired of skipping life just to avoid the whispers. So I stayed. And then those doors flew open. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. But whoever had just arrived remained out of my line of sight, blocked by a wall of tuxedos and sequins. I didn't bother craning my neck. Drama had a way of seeking Kimberly out like a magnet. I assumed this was just another guest from her side of the list, fashionably late and eager to make an entrance. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Jessica looked radiant, the kind of glowing that photographs never quite capture. The kind of glow that comes from being deeply loved and knowing it. I tried to focus on her, on the vows, on the way her voice caught when she promised forever, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. It started right after the ceremony, during the walk toward the reception hall. I was doing my best to blend in with the flow of pastel dresses and rented tuxedos when Aunt Linda swooped in with a glass of champagne in one hand and her patented grin in place. "Still single, Natalie?" she asked, nudging me like we were co-conspirators in some sitcom. I smiled politely. "Yes, still." She leaned in, lowering her voice as if this was a secret worth keeping. "Well, you're young.
Still time.
Don't wait too long, though. Eggs don't freeze themselves, you know." She laughed at her joke and wandered off before I could respond, leaving the bitterness to settle on my tongue like bad wine. When I found my name card at the reception, it was at a small round table tucked near the edge of the dance floor. Table 11. The singles table. My fellow tablemates were a mix of distant cousins and vague family friends I barely remembered. One guy, Robbie or Ronnie, I wasn't sure, kept telling stories about his crypto investments, pausing only to check his phone for price alerts. Another girl, Emma, was live streaming parts of the wedding on her phone, narrating it like she was hosting her reality show. It all felt surreal, like I had stepped into some kind of twisted matchmaking game show. There was no escape except the bathroom or the bar, and I'd already been to both. The night wore on. At one point, Uncle Dan leaned across the table and said, "I know a guy I could introduce you to. He's recently divorced, 2 kids, but stable." I gave him a thin smile. "That's generous, but I'm fine." He chuckled, swirled the ice in his glass. "You won't be forever." My wine glass was rarely empty, and I couldn't decide if that was a blessing or a trap. Each sip dulled the edge, but also lowered my guard. Every few minutes, someone new would stop by my table to say hello, each interaction laced with undertones they thought I wouldn't notice. "Still working too hard? You've got to stop being so picky. Don't worry, your time will come." Like my life was a delayed delivery. Like I'd simply forgotten to check a box on the order form. It was exhausting being perceived like that. Like the one who had everything but the one thing that mattered. Not the one they congratulated, just the one they pitted. And I couldn't stop remembering the bridal shower. The pink decor. The gifts were wrapped in soft paper. The games, oh God, the games. One of them was a quiz about who would be next to get married. My name came up, and the room burst into polite laughter. Someone shouted, "Only if she stops dating spreadsheets." I laughed, too. What else could I do? But I felt small. I felt like the punchline. That moment had stayed with me longer than it should have. It echoed every time someone called me driven in that tight, awkward tone. as if ambition was some curse I needed to apologize for, as if I had traded love for success and had no right to ask for both. The music picked up again, and couples began to dance. Jessica and her new husband took the floor first, their steps slow and careful, like they were moving through a world no one else could touch. I watched them and let myself feel it, not envy this time, but grief. For the versions of myself that had believed love would come just because I earned it. For the nights I waited for someone who never chose me. For the times I told myself I didn't need anyone at all, just so I wouldn't feel the emptiness echo. Then someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, half expecting another cousin with a well-meaning suggestion, but it wasn't a cousin. It was someone else entirely. And suddenly, the late arrival at the ceremony made sense. It was Ethan, and I hadn't seen him in nearly 10 years. Now here I was again, sitting in a circle of smiling faces that all seemed to look right through me. The music swelled as the couple shared their first dance. Everyone clapped, phones held high to capture a love worth remembering. And I sat there clapping too, but with a heart that felt like glass under pressure. I wasn't bitter about love. Not really. I was just tired of feeling like my life was a cautionary tale. Tired of having to prove I was okay. Tired of being asked to explain why I hadn't yet become what they thought I should be. For them, this was just a wedding. For me, it felt like an exhibit. A reminder. A quiet humiliation wrapped in white linen and floral centerpieces. Even the napkins felt smug, folded into little swans as if they too were part of some perfect world I wasn't invited into. The music had just dipped into a slow jazz number when the double doors at the back of the hall swung open again, not with a creak, but with a bold, deliberate burst. Heads turned, necks craned. Even the DJ paused for half a beat. Standing in the entrance, framed by the golden light of the hallway, was Sebastian Reed. Yes, that's Sebastian Reed. The tech billionaire. The man whose face had been on the cover of every major magazine, whose startup had exploded into global success seemingly overnight. Tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in a black tailored suit with just the right amount of nonchalance. He looked like he had stepped out of a movie scene and onto the polished floor of my cousin's wedding. I stared, frozen. Everyone did. He scanned the room for a second, and then, God help me, his eyes landed on me. And then he smiled. Confident, warm, like we were old friends. Like he belonged here. Like I belonged to him. He strode through the room with the ease of someone used to attention, ignoring the whispers that followed his every step. My mouth went dry. Every cell in my body screamed that this had to be a mistake. But it wasn't. He reached my table, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and leaned down like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sorry, I'm late, sweetheart. Couldn't get away from the boardroom. He kissed my cheek lightly. My skin tingled. My mind went blank. I opened my mouth, closed it again, then somehow found the presence of mind to nod and smile. Traffic. I offered weakly. He laughed. That too. The entire table went silent. Even Robbie the crypto guy forgot what blockchain was. Every eye was on us. Someone whispered my name like a question. Emma dropped her phone. Seconds later, a wedding coordinator appeared out of thin air. Mr. Reed, we weren't expecting you, she said breathlessly. He smiled graciously. I was invited as Natalie's guest. I hope that's all right. Her face flushed. Of course, sir. We'll move you both to the VIP table. Within moments, we were ushered across the room to the long, flower-laced table near the bride and groom. Chairs were shifted. People scooted over. I took my seat beside Sebastian as if it was perfectly normal to have a billionaire crash a family wedding and declare himself mine. Around us, the whispers turned into stares. My mother blinked rapidly, her mouth parted in disbelief. Kimberly looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Dad finally looked up. And just like that, everything changed. Suddenly, I was no longer the girl at the singles table. No longer the woman who had come alone. I was someone interesting. Someone enviable. Someone who was dating Sebastian Reed. And I had no idea why. At the VIP table, I kept my posture upright, legs crossed at the ankles like I wasn't internally screaming. Sebastian sat beside me, cool as ever, sipping from a crystal glass of sparkling water as if he hadn't just turned my entire life into a surreal fever dream. I leaned toward him, keeping my voice low. "What are you doing?" He didn't look at me, just smiled, still watching the room. "Helping. Helping," I echoed. "Do I look like I need help?" He finally met my eyes. "You looked like you wanted to disappear." That stunned me into silence. Mostly because he was right, and because it hurt a little to be seen that. "But how do you even know who I am?" I asked. "We met at the Harvard Entrepreneurship panel. You asked me about founder fatigue. I remembered you." I blinked. That panel was over 2 years ago. I barely remembered what I had worn, let alone what I'd said. "I was impressed," he added. "You were the only one who didn't fawn." "I was stressed and caffeinated," I said, too stunned to say anything more clever. He chuckled. Still memorable. The toasts began. Jessica's father stood up, teary-eyed and warm. He talked about childhood moments, scraped knees, and the first time she said she loved the groom. People around us dabbed at their eyes with napkins. I just sat there, trying to breathe, to process, to exist without combusting. "Why are you here?" I whispered. Sebastian looked thoughtful. "Because sometimes it's good to remind people that they're not invisible." It felt like he had reached inside my chest and touched something raw. I should have asked more questions. I should have pulled him aside, told him this was too much, too fast, too absurd. But I didn't. Because for the first time that night, I didn't feel like the outsider. For the first time in what felt like years, people looked at me without pity. Kimberly's lips were pressed into a tight line, her date forgotten. My mother was watching me with a kind of stunned wonder. Even Dad raised his glass when Sebastian said something polite to him. I leaned back in my chair, allowed myself to feel it, this strange, surreal warmth. The soft edges of belonging. The tiny spark of possibility. I didn't know what would happen after tonight. Maybe Sebastian would disappear back into his world of boardrooms and media deals. Maybe we'd laugh about this someday. Or maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something I hadn't dared to hope for in a long time. Either way, for now, I allowed myself to exist in this moment. To take up space at the VIP table. To be the woman who didn't settle for crumbs and silence. I wasn't an exhibit anymore. I was part of the story. He leaned in slightly, voice low. "You okay?" I nodded. "Barely." "Who are you, and why are you saving me?" He smiled. "Long story. Let's just say you looked like you needed a parachute." He offered his hand under the table. "Sebastian." "Obviously." "Natalie," I replied, shaking it. His palm was warm, steady. "Though I guess you already knew that." "Guilty. You looked like you were trying to melt into your chair. I couldn't let you drown alone." We laughed softly, just between us. And for the first time that day, I felt my breath finally start to return. Like I wasn't suffocating in my skin anymore. Soon after, someone asked how we met. Sebastian didn't miss a beat. We were seated next to each other at a fundraiser in New York. She corrected a financial projection mid-presentation. Blew everyone away. I blinked, then caught on. "And you introduced yourself after the panel. Said something about wanting to hire me." "I lied," he said with a grin. "I just wanted her number." It was absurd, flawless, and a little intoxicating. Like slipping into a story that had already been written, one where I got to be something other than background noise. As the night went on, the line between performance and reality blurred. Sebastian was attentive, warm, without being possessive. He made space for me to speak, laughed at my dry jokes, and asked questions that didn't feel obligatory. He didn't pretend to be impressed, he was. He talked about books. He read more than I expected, and travel, and the weird pressure to perform our lives for other people's comfort. It was surreal how easy it felt to talk to him. Even more surreal how safe it felt. Like I wasn't just playing pretend. Like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a performance anymore. And then Kimberly walked by. "Oh wow," she said, lips pressed into a disingenuous smile. "Natalie, you didn't tell us you were dating Sebastian Reed. I would have gotten a better gift." Her words were coated in sugar, but the blade underneath gleamed sharp. I felt my stomach twist, my body bracing instinctively. Before I could respond, Sebastian stood and turned toward her with a calm, pointed smile. "I'm a lucky man," he said. "Natalie doesn't waste time trying to impress people who don't deserve her." Kimberly blinked. Just a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by her usual practice charm.
Right.
"Well, good for you both." She walked off, heels clicking a little too loudly, and I felt something I hadn't in years, defended. Sebastian sat again and looked at me. Was that too much? I shook my head, a little dazed.
No.
It was perfect. The noise of the reception carried on around us. Plates clinked, toasts were made, and laughter rose and fell like waves. But between us, something had shifted. The joke wasn't a joke anymore. The act was starting to feel like something else, something solid. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not for what I lacked, not as a project or a punchline, but for who I was. And I didn't want it to end. It couldn't last, of course. I knew that. People like Kimberly don't let illusions survive if they're not the ones spinning them. She started circling like a hawk during dinner, asking too many questions with that faux-curious smile. Where did they meet again? What fundraiser? Had they posted any pictures together? Her voice sugary, but her eyes sharp. She was digging, looking for cracks. By the time dessert was served, I saw her texting furiously. Her phone screen glowed like a threat just out of reach. 15 minutes later, she cornered us on the terrace, the distant music from the dance floor muffled by the glass doors behind her. "Well," she said, arms folded across her designer dress, "I did a little browsing. No press photos. No mentions. No social posts. Kind of weird for a tech billionaire, don't you think?" Sebastian stepped forward, calm but firm. "Not everything in my life ends up online." Kimberly smirked.
Sure.
"But a woman like Natalie? She'd post about a guy like you." My chest tightened. The way she said it, a woman like Natalie, said everything.
Plain.
Predictable. Alone. Of course, someone like me wouldn't have someone like him. I turned toward Sebastian and shook my head. "It's okay." "Natalie," he started, but I held up my hand.
No.
"She's right." Kimberly's smirk deepened, but I ignored her. "This isn't real," I said, voice steady even as my stomach sank. "He was just being kind. That's all. It's not what it looked like." The look on Sebastian's face broke something in me. Not because he looked smug or embarrassed, he didn't. He looked disappointed. Sad even. But he nodded. "All right." I turned to Kimberly. "You win." She blinked, surprised at how easily I let go. She expected a fight. I didn't have it in me. I walked back inside, my head held high. My heart was heavy, sure, but not because of shame. It was something else. Something more complicated. At the table, my dessert sat untouched. A piece of cake with sugared petals and a name card I suddenly couldn't bear to look at. I excused myself again, this time finding refuge in the quiet of the powder room. I sat on the edge of the velvet bench, pressed my hands into my lap, and let myself breathe. Why did it hurt? It had all been fake, hadn't it? Except it hadn't. Not entirely. That feeling, that warmth, that ease, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, it had felt true. And that scared me more than anything else. When I finally returned to the hall, Sebastian was gone. No dramatic exit. No lingering gaze from across the room. Just gone. The night carried on without him. More dancing. More laughter. More champagne. I drifted through it like a ghost, nodding, smiling, accepting compliments I didn't feel. Later, as guests began leaving and chairs were pushed back from tables, Jessica pulled me into a hug. "I don't know what that was," she whispered, "but I've never seen you shine like that." I smiled and nodded and said all the right things. "Congratulations."
Thank you. So happy for you.
But inside, I was already rewinding. To his hand on my shoulder, for the way he made space for me, to the moment he looked at me like I wasn't background noise. And when I finally got home, kicked off my heels, and sat alone in my apartment, I pulled out my phone. There was a message waiting. From Sebastian. I meant it, you know. All of it. Let me know when you're ready to stop pretending. Sebastian glanced at his phone, which had been vibrating in his pocket.
He sighed.
I have to go. One of my companies is under a cyber attack. No choice. Of course, I said, almost grateful for the excuse to disappear. He paused, then looked me in the eyes. Natalie, for what it's worth, this wasn't all fake. Not for me. I swallowed hard but didn't answer. He lingered just a second longer, then turned and walked down the terrace steps into the night, disappearing into the swirl of lights and valet cars below. I stood there under the string lights, arms wrapped around myself, suddenly cold. The act was over. The stares would return now, not with curiosity, but with judgment, maybe even pity again. I could already feel the weight of the glances that would follow me back inside. The ones that said, "We knew it was too good to be true." But somewhere underneath the sting, I knew the truth. For a few hours, I had felt seen. I felt worth standing up for. And even if it had all been temporary, even if it had begun as a fantasy, it had meant something real to me. The day after the wedding, I called Olivia. She'd been my closest friend since college, the one person who had seen me cry over missed chances and microwave dinners, who had never once made me feel small. She answered on the second ring, her voice still thick with sleep. I need to tell you something, I said, and then I told her everything: Sebastian, the charade, Kimberly, the confrontation on the terrace. There was a long pause. Then she sighed. Okay, so it was messy. But you weren't wrong for wanting someone to show up for you. That doesn't make you weak, Nat. It makes you human. Her words settled into something I didn't know I needed. Because maybe that had been the hardest part, not feeling foolish for falling into a moment, but feeling guilty for wanting it in the first place. I wasn't ashamed of wanting a connection. I was just tired of pretending I didn't. A few days later, I messaged Kimberly and asked to meet for lunch. Not to fight. Not to rehash the drama.
Just to talk.
I didn't know what I expected, but I knew I couldn't keep carrying the bitterness. It was wearing me down. She showed up in oversized sunglasses and a designer blouse, all gloss and posture, but the moment we sat down, something in her face softened. She stirred her iced tea like it was a nervous tick. I didn't mean to humiliate you, she said without looking up. I was just jealous, I guess. You looked happy. I blinked. Of me? She nodded. You have your own life. You know who you are. I've been trying so hard to look like I have it all together, and it's exhausting. Her words felt strange coming from her, the sister who always seemed composed, envied, and adored. But sitting across from me now, she looked tired in a way I recognized. A kind of soul exhaustion that no amount of makeup or perfectly arranged Instagram stories could mask. For a while, we just sat in silence. Then I said, "We've spent our whole lives being compared. Maybe it's time we stop doing it to ourselves." Her eyes watered, and for once, she didn't bother to hide it. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was something close. A beginning. Later that week, I visited my parents. I didn't dress up or rehearse what I'd say. I just walked in, sat down at the kitchen table, and let the words come. I always felt like I had to earn your attention, like being dependable wasn't enough unless it came with applause. My mom's face crumpled first. My dad looked like I'd slapped him. I'm not blaming you, I added quickly. I just need you to see me. Not just the version you imagined, but me. Who am I? It wasn't a smooth conversation. There were long silences, some defensiveness, a few tears. But by the end, my mom reached across the table and took my hand. I see you now, she whispered. And maybe for the first time, I believed her. It was a quiet Sunday evening when my phone buzzed. I had just curled up on the couch, wearing mismatched socks and eating takeout straight from the container. A single message lit up the screen. Sebastian, can I see you? I stared at it for a long time, fingers hovering over the screen, heart thudding harder than it should have. Then I typed back. You're kind of dramatic, you know that? A moment later. Sebastian, I'm downstairs. I froze. Pulled the curtain aside. Sure enough, there he was, standing in front of my building like some kind of surreal epilogue to a dream I hadn't finished reading. I buzzed him in. When I opened the door, he was standing in the hallway holding two coffees and looking entirely out of place in my worn-down building. But his smile was cautious this time, not cocky. Like he knew this wasn't a joke anymore. "I didn't come to play the hero," he said as I let him in. I remembered you. From a conference 8 months ago. You were on a panel. You said something about how women aren't taken seriously unless they're either cold or perfect. It stuck with me. I blinked. "You remembered that?" "I remembered you." He set the coffees down and ran a hand through his hair. "When I saw you at the wedding, sitting there like you were trying to disappear, I just acted. And I'd do it again. But I should have asked." I looked at him, really looked at him. Not the polished figure from the magazines. Not the fantasy. Just the man in front of me, standing a little too tall, as if bracing for rejection. "I don't know what this is," I said. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I know it wasn't fake. And if you'd let me, I'd like to find out what it could be." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't fireworks. It was just the beginning. I took one of the coffees and gestured toward the couch. "Okay, but you're buying dinner next time. And I don't mean caviar." He grinned, and we sat. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to earn the moment. I didn't have to shrink or polish or prove. I just had to be. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You turned my life into a rom-com for a night." Sebastian laughed softly, the corners of his mouth lifting into that easy, unhurried smile I was starting to recognize as real, not performative. "I know. And I swear, this isn't part of the script. I'd just like to see you. For real. No pretending. No spotlight." I studied him for a long second. He was still standing there like the hallway hadn't changed since he arrived, holding a coffee for me like it was the only offering he could make. No fanfare. No expectations. I nodded.
Okay.
"One date." His grin was slow, warm. "You won't regret it." I wasn't so sure. But for once, I wasn't afraid to find out. The next 6 months unfolded nothing like I expected, and everything I needed. Sebastian and I went on real dates. Not the fantasy kind with designer lighting and photo-worthy outfits. No rooftop fireworks or celebrity appearances. Just us. Walks through the city as the sun sets behind old brick buildings. Diners that served greasy fries and the best milkshakes in town. Quiet nights with takeout and black and white movies, where we fell asleep mid-conversation with half-eaten popcorn between us. He didn't try to impress me, and I stopped trying to be impressive. We talked about everything. His fear of being reduced to headlines and numbers. My fear of fading into the background. He told me about the pressure to keep building, growing, staying relevant, how exhausting it was to never just be. I told him how I'd spent years trying to prove my worth, waiting for someone to say, "You matter, too." And slowly, the walls I'd built began to soften. I didn't tear them down all at once, I just made space. For warmth. For mistakes. For him. He learned how I took my coffee, how I liked my books stacked in piles instead of shelves, how I talked to myself when I thought no one was listening. I learned that despite all his wealth and control, he sometimes needed silence more than answers. He kept a dog-eared copy of The Little Prince by his bed. He hated olives but loved olive oil. He was complicated, but never cruel. Driven but not unkind. My family changed, too, in small but real ways. My mother started asking how I was feeling, not just what I was achieving. She still had that tone sometimes, the one that said she was trying to say the right thing instead of the honest one. But she was trying. And that meant more than I expected. My dad started sending me articles he thought I'd enjoy. One day, he called me out of nowhere. No reason. No news. Just, "Hey, I was thinking about you. Proud of you, Nat." I hung up and cried in the hallway, a little stunned at how healing could sound so simple. And one night over dinner, while laughter echoed around the table and someone passed the wine, Sebastian reached for my hand beneath the linen napkins. And no one looked away. No one stiffened. It just was. Even Kimberly changed. She took a step back from curating her life. Started teaching yoga twice a week, something she said was grounding. She posted less, laughed more. She didn't apologize for who she'd been, but she wasn't hiding behind it anymore either. We weren't suddenly best friends, but we were finally something better, honest. None of it made me magically fixed. I still had days when doubt curled against my chest like fog. Still had moments when old insecurities whispered that I was too much, too driven, too quiet, too stubborn, too whatever. But now I had someone who knew how to quiet those voices, not with empty reassurance, but with presence, with truth, with the reminder that I wasn't hard to love. I'd just been loving the wrong way. For the first time, love didn't feel like something I had to earn. It just felt like coming home. Thanksgiving arrived with a scent of roasted garlic, cinnamon, and something warm baking in the oven. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking into a spotlight. I wasn't rehearsing my answers or adjusting my posture before knocking on the door. The house was filled with the chaotic comfort I remembered, pots clanging, laughter from the living room, the hum of old jazz floating softly from the stereo. It felt familiar, but not suffocating. It felt lived in. Sebastian walked beside me, one hand balancing a pie box, the other resting lightly at the small of my back. There was no tension in his body, no stiffness, just quiet certainty, like he belonged beside me. My mother greeted us at the door.
Her smile was wide, not forced.
"Hi, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug before turning to Sebastian. "We're so glad you're here." At dinner, Dad asked Sebastian about his favorite childhood books, not his companies. About his hobbies, not his headlines. About the time he tried cooking pasta and accidentally set off his penthouse fire alarm. Kimberly teased him about it later, but there was no edge in her voice. Just teasing. Just sisterly banter. She complimented the pumpkin bread I brought, something I used to overthink, and asked if I wanted to help with a holiday fundraiser she was organizing. I said yes and meant it. Somewhere between the second round of pie and the fire crackling in the living room, Sebastian leaned in close, his voice low and steady, just for me. "I was thinking," he began, fingers brushing mine under the blanket. "Next year, we do this again. Same table, same chaos, just with a couple of new traditions of our own." I turned to him, heart full in that quiet, steady way I had finally learned to trust. "You like Thanksgiving now, don't you?" He smiled. "I like you." I laughed and leaned into him, letting my head rest lightly against his shoulder. No fireworks. No performance. Just warmth. Just presence. As the night slowed and everyone drifted into that satisfied holiday days, I looked around the room. My family, my partner, my place in it all. And I thought back to that wedding. That navy blue dress. The singles table. The eyes that passed over me. The way I felt like a failure just for showing up alone. But the truth is that moment, those whispers, that awkward table, even the embarrassment, was the start of something. It cracked open the version of me I had tried so hard to protect. It pushed me toward discomfort. Toward honesty. Toward the kind of connection that wasn't filtered or forced. And now I knew something I had never fully believed back then. I wasn't just enough. I had always been. And I wasn't alone anymore, not because someone showed up to rescue me, but because I finally started showing up for myself.